Chapter 7. Daniel Pilkington rematerialized directly in front of the runner. He wanted a chance to gauge first expressions before a runner had a chance to prepare. Also, past experiences had taught him that arriving suddenly from behind made runners uncomfortable and thus less cooperative. The runner was still on the floor, with her head hidden in her lap. She looked up at his arrival. Daniel stared at her in amazement. Her face looked exactly the same as the one he had seen in the photo. She hadn't morphed, hadn't used Polyjuice Potion at all. How could that be? Surely the very efficient P. Crowley would have recognized her. The girl was clearly school-aged, and photos of all Hogwarts students were on record for monitor use. Further, most monitors during the summer were student interns earning extra pay. The monitor should have recognized her easily from school. Perhaps there was some other form of disguise. Daniel studied the girl closer. Her eyes were puffy and red. She had obviously been crying. "Are you okay?" he asked impulsively, noting the red mark and lump on the side of her temple. The girl nodded her head slowly, all the while regarding him steadily with her green eyes. Her face was smudged with dirt, with more at the hairline. Hairline? That wasn't dirt, concluded Daniel with satisfaction. She had colored her hair. That could explain the recognition confusion. What color was her hair originally? Probably blonde. It would be the easiest to dye. So, who was she? Daniel could always ask his daughter. She would know. But he would never ask her to inform on a fellow non. He would figure it out eventually. "I am Detective Daniel Pilkington, Wizard, 2nd class," he said, introducing himself. "I expect you know my daughter, Layla," he added conversationally. There was a faint flicker of recognition in the girl's eyes, confirming what he already suspected, that the two were probably classmates. It also established him as a non, not a Slytherin, despite his uniform. "Come with me, please," he said, holding out his hand to her, offering to help her up. Then he waited. Where Slytherin violence often strengthened resolve, simple courtesy could work miracles. The girl looked at him and his outstretched hand silently for a full minute. Then she slowly stretched her own arm out and put her hand in his. Daniel smiled to himself as he firmly grasped the hand and helped pull the girl to a standing position. It was a small victory in trust, but one that could eventually lead to further cooperation and identification. He apparated them both out of the detention room. When the two had arrived in the station proper, Daniel paused to let the girl get her bearings. Apparating could be a very disorienting experience, especially for beginners. She was too young to learn apparating at school, and the way she staggered slightly in his grasp meant this girl was definitely a beginner. Presently the girl looked about with more interest, signaling her recovery. "My office is this way," Daniel said, releasing her hand and indicating a direction. "If you'll come with me, please." This was another exercise in trust, on his part. Would she come willingly, or try to run? The girl couldn't run far or actually escape, especially inside the building without a security badge, but she didn't necessarily know that. From now on, everything she said and did was a clue to her identity, and might suggest ways he could use to return her to her family. The girl hesitated momentarily, and then moved to join him, matching her speed with his. Daniel relaxed, encouraged by her act. She was definitely not a hardened runner, determined to gain her freedom at all cost. "How old are you?" he asked conversationally. It was a fairly harmless question, designed to get her talking and used to answering questions. 13, she whispered, confirming his guess in her age. Daniel nodded. "As is Layla," he said, reminding her again of his non-status. "That means you've completed your 2nd year at Hogwarts. Am I correct?" he asked as they continued walking down the hall. "Yes, sir," she answered, keeping step with him while looking all around. "Layla's brother Dylan will be starting next year," added Daniel informatively. "Have you any brothers or sisters?" "A brother," she finally whispered, so softly only he could hear. "Oh," said Daniel casually. "What's his name?" Runners often gave up family names sooner than their own. They walked several steps before she whispered, "Vernon." "That's a nice name," said Daniel, if it were correct. "Is he in Hogwarts too?" "No," whispered the girl. "Where are we?" she asked suddenly, changing the subject. "We're in Wizard Security Station number 4, replied Daniel matter-of-factly. Daniel was thinking rapidly about what the girl had said. A brother not in Hogwarts. That meant a sibling younger than age 10, or aged 17 or older. Hopefully she'd tell him her name. If not, this information could narrow things down considerably when it came to identifying the girl. "Where is that?" she asked. "It's near Croydon," he replied, looking down at her with surprise. Surely she knew that. The security station locations were kept secret only from the Muggles, not wizards. "Oh," came her soft voice. There was something odd about the girl. Daniel couldn't quite pin down what, but he'd figure it out eventually. He was good at puzzles. They continued walking and passed Wizard Flint's office. The door was closed, indicating he was out. He was probably off on another security pickup. Pickups looked good on a resume, and Flint liked how the Muggles backed away in fear when he walked past. They walked a few more steps when suddenly the girl pulled to a stop in front of Cedric Diggory, seated straight and tall in his chair, waiting for the next instruction. Daniel stopped also and watched her. She put her hand out tentatively and touched his shoulder. "It's okay," said Daniel soothingly. "That's Wizard Diggory. He won't hurt you." She'd probably never seen someone like Cedric before. "Cedric?" she whispered, looking up at Daniel. "Yes, Cedric," confirmed Daniel in surprise. "He works here." How had she known of Cedric? He certainly wasn't a secret, but what had happened to him was so long ago, most people had forgotten about it. His name was rarely mentioned these days. Was the girl related to the Diggorys? He didn't think Amos Diggory had any other family, but perhaps she was a cousin. "What happened?" she asked, looking again at Cedric. "No one knows." The girl looked up at him with her piercing green eyes, as if recognizing the lie he had just told. Of course he knew what had happened and who did it. Everyone did. She had done it before and had confessed to that crime freely, without regret. No one doubted that she had done it again. But that was before the Dark Lord had taken total power, before he had decided to assume the mantle of legitimacy, to cloak his control under a veneer of normalcy. All the regular wizard laws still applied, even to the Slytherins. It just took more evidence to prove a case against a Slytherin. The Dark Lord's decision kept the wizard community functioning on the surface like a normal bureaucracy, with a majority of its frightened members hoping they were so insignificant they would escape his notice. It also enabled the Muggles to continue on believing they had a constitutional monarchy with rights, none of which actually existed should the Dark Lord so decide. It would not do for this image of normalcy to have his chief supporters and advisors, the Death Eaters, as they still called themselves, openly confess to what was regarded by all as criminal acts. So they didn't. The group continued to do as they pleased, but behind closed doors, or in front of witnesses who would never talk. No one was foolish enough to accuse them of any crime. Those who had made such accusations in the past never made it to court to testify. They merely vanished or died, becoming a victim of yet another unsolved crime. "He's thirsty," the girl said softly, interrupting Daniel's thoughts. Was he? How did one tell? "There's some water over there," Daniel said aloud, indicating a small table with a tumbler and a pitcher in an alcove nearby. "Why don't you get him some? You can pour yourself some water, too, if you like," he added. Cedric looked fine to him. What made her think he was thirsty? The girl carefully filled the tumbler with water and returned to Cedric. She looked up questioningly at Daniel. "What now?" she asked. "Wizard Diggory," began Daniel, getting Cedric's attention, "drank the water in the glass." Cedric took the tumbler from the girl's hand and drank deeply. When he finished, he held the empty glass out, and the girl took it away, returning it to the table. "Is that better?" asked Daniel curiously. "Yes," said the girl with a hint of a smile. She poured herself a glass of water and took a deep drink. Then she frowned. Setting the glass down on the table, she asked, "May I touch him?" and looked questioningly at Daniel. "Yes," said Daniel, wondering what she would do next. The girl adjusted Cedric's arm to a more comfortable-looking position. Then she reached under him and pulled out a thick book and handed it to Daniel. "Thank you," he said gravely. Daniel's features creased into a frown as he looked at the book. A Study of Slytherin Intellectual Superiority by Electo Caro. Inwardly he seethed. A Slytherin must have deliberately left it on Cedric's chair. It was a totally useless gesture. What good was it to tease and taunt someone who didn't even realize it was happening? That apparently didn't stop some Slytherins. Suddenly, he wondered how the girl knew about the book in the first place. Daniel had been looking directly at Cedric and hadn't noticed it there. But he would save his questions for later, someplace more private. The two reached Daniel's office a few meters later. As usual, Daniel checked his security sensors upon entry. A non's door could never be locked against a Slytherin, and Daniel's office was no exception, so Daniel never bothered trying. Unless he needed to activate the security force field, Daniel kept his door open at all times. Daniel did like to know if anyone had visited his office in his absence. Daniel's security sensor provided him with that information. Wizard Flint had visited Daniel's office frequently last year when he first started his job. He stopped after a while, no doubt because he had found nothing. There was nothing to find. Daniel kept his office strictly business without any trace of his home or family. Further, Daniel had an excellent memory, so outside of the required log records, he never put anything in writing concerning his interviews or conclusions until his actual report was written, signed, and ready to submit. That kept ambitious Slytherins from using Daniel's efforts to further their own careers. "Have a seat," Daniel told the runner, pulling out the only other chair in his tiny office. The girl hesitated briefly, and then sat down. She watched him closely with her green eyes following his every move. Daniel walked over to a narrow shelf on one wall and pulled down a small blue-green flask and a medium-sized spoon. Opening the flask, he poured some light green potion into the spoon. "Drink this," he said, offering her the spoon. She looked suspiciously at the potion in the spoon, and then at him. "It's for your head," explained Daniel. "Nothing else, I swear. You've probably got a raging headache." Daniel carried quite a few low-level potions as remedies against the cuts and bruises runners often received in the process of their arrest. Parents didn't like to see their children all beat up. Neither did he. The girl nodded slowly and took the spoon. She made a face and gagging sound as she swallowed the potion. "Yeah," said Daniel sympathetically while collecting the spoon. "I know it tastes awful, but it works." The fancier potions with a pleasant taste were reserved for Slytherin use only. "Is that better?" he asked after a moment. The girl nodded slowly. "Good," Daniel said as he recorked the flask. He returned the flask and spoon to their place on the shelf. Then he squeezed himself behind the desk and sat down. Wizard Flint often laughed about Daniel's small room and tiny desk, scarcely wide enough to hold the folders he worked with. But Daniel liked it that way. It made his office seem less imposing and intimidating to the runners he most often dealt with. Daniel pulled out his wand, waved it, and said, "Muffliato." The sounds from the outside office ceased. All became still and quiet. Daniel stowed his wand carefully and then fixed his eyes on the girl. "Now we can get down to business." The girl stirred restlessly in her seat, unsure of what Daniel would say. "I expect you're ready to go home by now. Am I correct?" began Daniel. The girl nodded warily. "Well, it's my job to see that you and your family are reunited as soon as possible." That wasn't his only duty, but the only one that mattered to Daniel, the one that kept him coming back to the office day after day, despite the people for whom he worked. Without his efforts, runners would fare much worse within the system. "To do that," Daniel continued, "I'm going to need your help. Do you understand?" The girl sat still a while and then nodded silently, her green eyes fixed squarely on him. "Now, you already know my name," he added. "May I ask yours?" The girl looked at him fearfully, plainly afraid to speak. "I know I work for security," admitted Daniel, "but I'm a non, like you. I'm not going to hurt you. You can trust me." Daniel put all the sincerity he could manage in his words, willing the girl to believe him. This was it. If he had managed to establish enough rapport between them, enough trust, the girl would give him her name, and Daniel could get on to more important things, like contacting her family and getting the girl out of here. The girl looked down. Daniel waited patiently, giving her time to think. Finally she looked up at him, and he heard her soft but clear voice hesitantly speak out. "Holly Wycliffe." Daniel sighed, disappointed. He had been so sure she would tell him her name. "I can't help you unless you tell me the truth," he began. "We've already established that you are a student at Hogwarts, and you and I both know there are no Wycliffes enrolled at Hogwarts, or even on the register. So why don't you tell me your real name?" And with those words, Daniel suddenly sensed he had lost her. The hopeful openness he had seen in her face clouded over like a shell, and she retreated into silence. Somehow his failure to believe what was plainly not true had affected their whole relationship. For whatever reason, Daniel realized she would not give him her name now. What to do next? "Okay," conceded Daniel. "We can get back to that later. I still want to help," he continued. "Is there something I can get for you or do for you? Someone I can contact or leave a message that you're okay? I'm sure your family's worried about you." The girl looked at him with a thoughtful expression on her face. She was at least listening, so Daniel continued. "Or even if you just want to talk a while, I'll listen. I assure you I won't pass on anything you say, unless a superior directly asks me to relate it." That was the other thing Daniel did. He listened. It was unofficial, of course, but he tried to help the runners sort out their feelings and problems so they could come to terms with their lives. Daniel tried to ensure they didn't run again. "I know that doesn't sound like much of a guarantee," he admitted, "but frankly, no superior has ever inquired past my written report or asked me that sort of question." Would she believe him? It was the truth. While Daniel was required to honestly and fully answer every direct question from a superior, he couldn't presume to know what information a superior wanted otherwise. Consequently, Daniel never volunteered unrequested information and kept all answers to a minimum. The Slytherin superiors in his department were so self-centered they had no interest in the problems of the runners as long as the runners pled guilty and paid their fines. The girl licked her lips nervously. She began fearfully. "Yes?" Daniel waited for her to continue. "I need to get to London." She blurted the words suddenly, almost as if she was afraid she'd get into trouble for saying them. So she hadn't planned to go to Thorpe. "Is that where your parents are?" Daniel asked hopefully, watching her carefully while keeping any expression off his face. The girl stared at him with her big green eyes and slowly shook her head. It was just a fraction in either direction, but definitely a shake. Daniel sat back. If her parents had lived in London, it would have narrowed things down considerably. Now he had to look at residents everywhere except London. "Unfortunately," he replied regretfully, "I am afraid I can't help you. I am not permitted to remove you from the station for any reason. I can only arrange your release into the hands of your parents or legal guardian, and they must come here to get you." The girl sat back, clearly disappointed, and retreated into silence again. Daniel decided to ask a question of his own. "Are your parents, perhaps, in Suffolk?" Daniel watched her closely. The Smiths could have been neighbors, but he doubted it. Then she would have known they had been picked up. The girl paled, recognizing the significance of his words. She shook her head. He could tell she hadn't realized she had been watched. "That was a very dangerous thing to do," he told her sternly, mentioning no names but no longer talking of her parents. The girl squeezed her eyes shut and buried her face in her hands. "I didn't remember," she said as tears began to leak between her fingers. "I didn't think they would all be—" "Not thinking can get you killed," Daniel stated bluntly. "Fortunately, that is not my department. However," he added, deciding to risk a warning, "you would be wise to never mention what you did in the station again." The girl nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." She sniffed, using her sleeve to wipe her face dry. "Thank you," she added softly. "You would also be wise to give me your name, your real name," continued Daniel. "There are holding cells in the center of the station," he explained. "When we are finished talking, you will be taken there. You will remain in confinement until a release can be arranged. If, after 30 days, no parent or legal guardian has come to arrange your release, then a hearing will be scheduled to determine your fate. That can take another 3 to 4 weeks to arrange, or longer. So you see, you're looking at another month, maybe 2 of confinement, minimum, if we can't get your parents down here to help." The girl clearly looked distressed at this information, but did not speak. Daniel sighed. Some runners took a lot of convincing. He rummaged around in his desk and pulled out a blank piece of paper. Using his wand, he caused some writing to appear on it. "This is a copy of the charges lodged against you," he said, handing the paper to the girl. She looked at it while he continued to speak. "Now," he explained, "should you waive your right to a hearing and plead guilty to these charges, The most you can expect to receive as punishment are some fines. Admittedly, the fines won't be cheap, but it's better than sitting around 2 months with a dementor for company while waiting for your hearing." The girl paled at the mention of dementors. Daniel continued, "If money is a problem, there is a runner's fund your parents can tap into for help. Almost all the Nons had run at one time or another, and when they made it back home safe, they contributed to the fund so other runners could come home too. Once the paperwork is signed and the fines paid, I can get you immediately released into the custody of your parents, and you can go home." Daniel paused to let that sink in. Then he continued, "There is no advantage to you if you let your case go to court. You will undoubtedly be found guilty of all charges, as it will be your word against that of 2 Slytherins." The girl looked up at him. "But I didn't have any potion," she protested, placing the page on his desk. "Yeah, I know," said Daniel dismissively. "Cabbage soup, wasn't it?" The girl looked down, and Daniel saw a hint of red creep into her cheeks. He took that for a yes. "Well, if this gets handled out of court, I can easily get that charge dropped for you. If it comes to court, you can call me to testify, and with the bag included as evidence, we can still get it dropped. But Wizard Flint will be embarrassed if it comes out in court that he was fooled by cabbage soup. Embarrassing him would be a very dangerous thing to do," warned Daniel. "Wizard Flint can be very vindictive. He'll press for a guilty verdict and maximum fines on all other charges. Then he'll probably go after your parents, family, and friends as well, making them his personal targets for harassment. You have no idea the kind of trouble he can cause," he added. "And when all is said and done, you will still have to pay the fines, and your parents will still have to come in to get you before you can be released. Do you understand?" The girl nodded, while still not looking up. She pulled at the fabric of her oversized gray sweatshirt nervously. Daniel noted this and softened his tone. "If, on the other hand, your parents were to come in now, then I think we could work together to make some of these charges go away." Daniel carefully refrained from stating the obvious, that he'd have to know their names and hers to get them in here. "Now the first one," he began. "Traveling without authorization. I can't do anything about that. You definitely did that." The girl didn't argue and continued to tug at her shirt, pulling it this way and that. "The next one," he continued, resisting arrest. "Given Wizard Flint's size and yours, I can't imagine you put up much of a struggle. If I can get all the paperwork done promptly and approach Wizard Flint when he's in a good mood, I'm certain I can get him to drop it." Daniel paused while considering the third charge. "What about your wand? Is it at your house by any chance?" The hand stopped moving, clenched up, and there was just the slightest shake of her head. "Pity," replied Daniel. "Dare I ask where it is?" "Lost," came the faintest of whispers, and the nervous tugging at her shirt resumed with more energy. "That's not good," replied Daniel sternly, while trying to determine whether she was lying. "Not good at all. It's got to be found. Caught traveling without your wand is bad enough. Failure to produce your wand at the hearing is worse and involves a whole new set of charges." The girl looked up with an expression of surprise. "You see," he explained further, "the court assumes you haven't actually lost it, but have given it to somebody not legally entitled to a wand. It'll be impossible for you to prove otherwise without the actual wand, and if it is truly lost, well, you can see the difficulties." She tipped her head faintly in understanding. "And in case you don't already know," he added, "replacement charges for a lost wand are horrendous." Daniel looked down at his list of charges, remembering what was left. "As I said before, the potions charge we can pretty much discount also," he said confidently, already planning on how he would do it. Daniel would write a preliminary report and submit it to Wizard Flint. Wizard Flint would scan the report and note that the potion was as yet unidentified, with the main ingredients apparently being cabbage and tomato. Wizard Flint would berate Daniel for not realizing it was soup, and insist Daniel rewrite the report, omitting the potion's charge. Letting Wizard Flint identify the potion, while demonstrating his superior intellect over Daniel, would enable him to correct his mistake without embarrassment. "That leaves us with this disrespecting charge." Daniel frowned, thinking, "What on earth did you do to make him think—" He broke off while looking at the girl. "Your eyes!" he exclaimed suddenly. "That's what was different about her. Did you do that with him?" "Do what?" she asked, looking totally confused. Did you look at him the way you are looking at me now? He demanded. Huh? Didn't you learn anything at school? He scolded. Those rules are for everywhere, not just Hogwarts. Of course he wrote you up for disrespect if you did that to him. Your eyes are supposed to be downcast when around a superior, explained Daniel. Looking at superiors directly in the eyes can be considered a challenge to their authority. Oh, she whispered, still staring at him. Not oh yes, noticed Daniel. In theory, he added, you should lower your eyes around me, too, as I work for security, which makes me your superior. In fact, she should have lowered them immediately when they first met, before she had learned he was a non, but she hadn't. There also wasn't the fear in her eyes or the automatic cringing one did in anticipation of a lesson, reinforcing the consequences of improper behavior. How had that happened? Oh, she said again, and immediately lowered her eyes. It's okay, amended Daniel. We're both nons. I don't need it. But now that I know what set him off, if you apologize sincerely, include lots of flattery, and explain you didn't realize the school rules applied outside of school, you might be able to talk him out of that charge. That's assuming you keep your eyes down properly the whole time. As he spoke, Daniel realized that while the girl had looked down when she was upset or embarrassed, she hadn't once averted her eyes in respect until he had mentioned it. Thank you, she said softly, but this time kept her head and eyes respectfully lowered. So, finished Daniel, can I call your parents? When she didn't respond, Daniel sighed and said, It appears you have decided to tough it out and wait for the hearing. Maybe you think the only one suffering will be yourself, right? Wrong. Wizard Flint won't drop any of the charges if you make him go to court. And in addition to the fines, your parents will also be required to pay all court costs. There's more, he added sternly. Did you know your parents are legally required to report your absence? Of course they haven't. What parent would? But if this comes to court before they report your absence, they'll be forced to pay a stiff fine for that, too. You don't want them to have to do that, do you? No matter who they are or what happened between you, I know they still love you and they want you back. Can't you see that it would be much better for everyone if I called your parents in now? He pleaded. In response, the girl brought her knees up in the chair, hugged them tightly, buried her head in her lap, and began to rock slowly back and forth. She moaned softly as she rocked. Clearly she was crying and trying hard to not let it show. What is it? Asked Daniel, concerned. What's wrong? The girl stopped rocking and looked up. Her face was wet with tears and smudged with brown hair color. My parents, she began, and choked on her sobs while more tears started streaming from her eyes. Daniel waited for her to continue. They won't be coming, she gulped, tucked her head back down in her lap, and cried some more. They won't, said Daniel in disbelief. This girl plainly loved her parents, which meant they loved her in return. Of course they'll come, he insisted. They can't, she whispered, her face still hidden in her lap while sobbing some more. But they'll have to come, he said firmly. They must, he assured her. If they don't show for your hearing, security will institute a non-head count to determine who is missing and thus learn your identity. Every non must be accounted for in person, along with his or her wand for verification. You know they won't be able to hide from that, he insisted. But the girl continued to sob and rock back and forth. Daniel gave up arguing. Ever? He asked finally. The girl lifted her tear-stained face to look at him with her piercing green eyes. Ever, she replied with finality. And I miss them so much, she added, and tucked her head back in her lap. She began to rock back and forth again. That's not possible unless... Daniel stopped. Are they dead? He asked, doubting they were, even as he asked. He hadn't heard of any wizards who had died or gone missing lately, but a recent death of her parents would explain the girl's extreme distress. Not really, the girl mumbled from under her arms. Are they in some sort of trouble? Bewitched, perhaps? He asked, while ignoring her strange response. What kind of an answer was, not really? No, not really, said the girl again, but not explaining further. Daniel sighed in exasperation. If they're not in trouble, then I don't suppose they are fugitives already in hiding. No, she mumbled, shaking her head, as he knew she would. He'd know if there were any fugitives with 13-year-old girls. Daniel thought for a moment. Her parents couldn't be in prison either. because even prisoners were checked during a head count. Well, he concluded, if they're not dead, bewitched, or fugitives, then they'll be found, he told her firmly. When your parents are identified, and they will be, he added with certainty, the Slytherins being very efficient at non-head counts, they will have to pay for the cost of the head count along with everything else. One or both of them may lose their jobs for failing to report your absence. Most likely a hearing will be held to determine their fitness as parents, in which case the courts will probably decide to place you in the custody of a proper Slytherin family. And believe me, he added as an aside, you don't want that. Your parents may even face time in Azkaban prison for abandoning you. They didn't abandon me, the girl blurted defiantly, suddenly looking up at him with her green eyes blazing. Of course not, agreed Daniel, startled by her intensity. So let me contact them. Impulsively, he reached over the desk and grasped her hand, still on her knee. It's going to be okay, he told her reassuringly. Let me help. We can get through this together. The girl looked at him with tears streaming down her eyes. Daniel looked back with as much sincerity as he could, willing her to believe he meant every word, which he did. She took several deep breaths and opened her mouth to speak. Suddenly, a loud pop sounded in their ears. That was the sound of the muffly auto spell breaking. No conversation could be kept private in the presence of a Slytherin, so Daniel's spell was designed to break as soon as someone neared his office. Daniel immediately looked over at the entrance, and the girl followed his glance. Wizard Flint strode in. "Got her ID'd yet?" he asked breezily, looking at the two. "No, sir," said Daniel, hastily standing up and making a short bow, while keeping his eyes carefully lowered. What was Wizard Flint doing here? He had never before interrupted an investigation after handing it off to Daniel. "Well, I'm sure you'd do better if you instilled some fear instead of trying to hold her hand," said Wizard Flint critically. "Of course," agreed Daniel. He kept his voice low, struggling to keep the frustration he felt from showing. He had been so close. A minute more and she would have told him everything. He just knew it. "Look at me," demanded Wizard Flint. "What?" questioned Daniel, looking up at Wizard Flint. "Not you," said Wizard Flint in frustration. "You," he said. Daniel saw Flint reach out, grab the girl's chin, and twist her face towards him. "Look at me," Wizard Flint repeated forcefully. She reluctantly looked up at Flint. Wizard Flint smiled. "Just as I thought," he said with satisfaction. "Green eyes." "What?" repeated Daniel in confusion, forgetting he shouldn't speak until first spoken to. "Green eyes," repeated Wizard Flint cheerfully, while ignoring Daniel's transgression. Wizard Flint glanced on the desk and noted the file there. He released the girl's chin and moved in closer. "That her file?" he inquired, sliding the folder off the desk. "Yes," admitted Daniel in a low voice. What was going on? Wizard Flint scanned the runner's form on the top. "You haven't filled out any of it," he accused. "No, sir," agreed Daniel. "My investigation is not complete." "Well, you should be filling it out as you go along like I do," he criticized. "It's more efficient, and you'll get done quicker." "Of course," replied Daniel, while trying to figure out the purpose of Wizard Flint's visit. "Not that it matters now," added Wizard Flint casually as he put the runner's form back in the folder. "Oh? What did that mean?" "I'm taking my case back," Wizard Flint announced. He handed Daniel an order form, already filled out and signed. "You are?" queried Daniel blankly, while trying to make sense of the paperwork before him. "Why?" he blurted, forgetting for a moment that it wasn't proper to inquire into the business or activities of his superiors. Daniel picked up his quill and signed the form, releasing the girl from his custody into Flint's. "Because," began Wizard Flint, overlooking Daniel's verbal blunder, "I'm taking her to Azkaban prison." He looked at Daniel smugly. "Good thing I remembered the message. Otherwise, you would have bungled everything by not sending her." "Azkaban," said Daniel in disbelief. "I don't believe I've ever seen such an order." And he hadn't, despite the fact he reviewed all orders regularly. "You wouldn't," said Wizard Flint arrogantly. "It's part of the communique sent only to wizards first class." He moved in and added, "Don't you wish you were a first-class wizard now? We know more." Daniel ignored the dig and looked at the girl sitting next to him. "But Azkaban?" he questioned again. "Her?" Wizard Flint laughed. "Yeah, I know," he agreed, tucking the folder under his arm. "She looks a little young to be a big, bad criminal, but she's got green eyes, and that's what counts." "What?" You see, explained Wizard Flint patiently, anyone with green eyes picked up in the little winging area is supposed to go directly to Azkaban prison. I kept thinking there was something important about her eyes, and then I remembered that directive. I saw the order ages ago. I remember thinking at the time that it was a rather unusual directive. No details, no explanation, just the bit about eyes. I have an excellent memory, you know, Wizard Flint confided proudly. It took a while to dig the order out and double-check the wording, but I was right. Somebody over there wants people with green eyes. Wizard Flint's icy blue eyes sparkled with excitement. It looks like the order was issued way before she was born, he continued, but it's never been countermanded. It probably has absolutely nothing to do with her, he added. But who cares, he finished gleefully. It's a chance to meet the folks at Azkaban, make some new connections. Maybe I'll even meet the person who put out the order. It's got to be somebody big. Wouldn't that be a feather for my cap? This is the sort of opportunity that can really advance my career, he added happily. Wizard Flint glanced over at the girl, noting she had dropped her head and eyes. Her hands tightly gripped the armrests of the chair. Fancy a trip to Azkaban, do you? He asked her gently. The girl moaned softly and gripped the armrest tighter. Now that's the way I like to see them. Too scared to move, he said with approval. You just have to find the right buttons to push, he told Daniel. Yes, sir, murmured Daniel automatically, while still trying to absorb the turn of events. I think we'll have a little discussion and finish filling out the form along the way, too. Would you like that? Wizard Flint asked the girl. She cringed visibly from his voice, turning her head away from him. Answer me, he demanded, raising his voice. No, sir, the girl's voice quavered. Wizard Flint laughed coldly. He knelt down and spoke softly in her ear. That's not the right answer, he told her. She leaned her body back, pushing it against the chair, trying to get further away from him. I'll wager you'll change your tune soon enough, he said. I bet the folks up at Azkaban are way worse than me. You'll be mighty grateful it was me that did the questioning instead of them. Wouldn't you agree? He asked, turning his head to Daniel. I wouldn't know, sir, replied Daniel, having never spoken to someone who had returned from Azkaban, no one able to answer questions. He feared the worst for the girl. Even if it turned out to be some huge mistake, people who went to Azkaban rarely returned. A low rumbling sound could be heard in the silence between words. Daniel identified the source easily. Wizard Flint straightened and cleared his throat, covering the noise of his stomach. It's lunchtime, he said dismissively. Have you fed her yet? No, sir. Right. Then I think I shall need a lunch for the trip. Something portable. A hot roast beef sandwich will do nicely, don't you think? Medium rare, with chips, tea, and a slice of peach pie. The girl turned her head abruptly at the mention of food. Yes, sir. I'd like it right away, added Wizard Flint. I plan to leave immediately. Wordlessly, Daniel handed Wizard Flint an order form to sign. Wizard Flint looked over at the girl as he signed the order. Her eyes were no longer averted, and she watched them both as they talked. Only one lunch should do, added Wizard Flint casually, after he noticed the girl watching them. He returned the paper to Daniel. She can watch me eat first, and then we'll have our little talk. You weren't hungry anyway, were you? He added, addressing the girl. She shook her head wordlessly, her eyes wide with fear. Wizard Flint smiled at her response. Right answer, he told her with satisfaction. Daniel stood and pulled out his wand. He hated conjuring food. There was so much opportunity for a superior to complain about the flavors and texture. Wizard Flint moved to the office entrance while Daniel worked. Diggory, come to Wizard Flint, he commanded, while looking down at the hall. Diggory only responded to a voice accompanied by eye contact. Will this do? Daniel asked Wizard Flint when he finished. Wizard Flint scanned the food on the desk briefly. Excellent, he pronounced, and signed off on a satisfactory completion of his order. You can box it for me for transport now. Daniel nodded and handed the wizard another form to sign. Cedric Diggory appeared at the office doorway. Wizard Flint took the boxed lunch and handed it to Cedric. Put this in security transport number 2, he told Cedric. Cedric took the lunch box and walked away. I've already signed it out, Wizard Flint told Daniel proudly. I knew I was right about the eyes, he added, looking back at the girl. She watched him silently. I'm good at noticing details. It's the little things that make all the difference. He moved towards the girl. Ready for a little ride? He asked cheerfully. The girl shrank back in the chair. She turned her head towards Daniel, her green eyes beseeching him for help. Daniel stood still, watching. There was no escape from the station, and nothing he could do to help, even a little bit. She was no longer his responsibility. Wizard Flint reached out, grabbed the girl high on the arm, and physically hauled her out of the chair, making her gasp in pain. "You're hurting her," protested Daniel, as Wizard Flint twisted the girl around and proceeded to put her in a painful arm lock, while digging his fingers into the opposite shoulder. The girl squirmed futilely in his grasp. "That's the trouble with you," criticized Wizard Flint confidently. "You're too soft. You'll never get promoted to first class. Better to be safe than sorry, I always say. Anyone destined for Azkaban prison should be regarded as a high-security risk and needs to be treated accordingly, even this worthless bit of non. No doubt this is all a big mistake, but that is their problem, not mine. It's no cause for me to slack off and not do my duty." Wizard Flint moved forward while forcing the girl to move as well. "I should be back by tomorrow," he called out cheerfully over his shoulder as he left the office, with or without the girl. Wizard Flint's laughter echoed down the hall. Daniel shivered. He had a feeling the girl would not return from Azkaban, ever. Despite the age of the directive, the girl had turned white as a sheet at the mention of green eyes, not Azkaban prison. He had a feeling there had been no mistake. The directive had not only netted the right person, but she had known exactly why.